Hey there everyone. This video is a long time coming. I wanted to sit down and talk to you guys about some of my gripes with PvP in the Elder Scrolls Online. Now, to be as transparent as possible, I'm going to be attempting to explain each problem I have and provide a potential solution or thought I have that can remedy the issue in some particular way. I also want to preface this entire video by saying that even though I'm going to criticize the developers of combat at ZOS, I don't want to see them harassed. I don't want to see anything negative going towards them by the community. The job of balancing large-scale MMORPG, and especially PvP, is very much an impossible task. But this video serves as a point to call out my personal thoughts with the state of PvP. And for the sake of this video, I want to mention that this is going to be things with the game itself, not people's certain playstyles. I don't care if you gank, if you bomb, if you're a healer, if you play in a ball group. I don't care. That's not what the point of this video is. But as I talk about these things, I'm going to try to keep the ideas and thoughts a bit more condensed. I don't want to make this like an hour-long rant with 30 different graphs, bunch of reference points. It's more or less going to be a generalized call-out of what bugs me with PvP and some of the general steps or directions we could take to remedy it. So first, we need to talk about time to kill, otherwise known as TTK. And it's ridiculously high in PvP, especially if you're not playing something like a bomber or a ganker. Now, I think this is more very unilateral through all the experienced players in the PvP community. If you have two really good PvP players duel each other, it could take forever. Now, I want to say, time to kill can come from very, very many factors, such as, but not limited to, hiding in mobility, healing over time, burst healing, mitigation such as resistances or percentages, heal stacking and cross healing, set choices, mythic choices. You're getting the idea here. Now overall, there's a lot of ways that can raise your time to kill just astronomically, and it's annoying. Now, how do we solve this problem? Without taking away from any core aspects of building your character the way you want, there needs to be some flat method of reducing player tankiness in PvP. Maybe a future addition to Battle Spirit that adjusts the damage done, healing done, received. As it stands, it's way too easy to survive in PvP, to the point that what was once considered to be tanky sets aren't all that needed anymore. You don't need tanky sets to play in PvP. It's ridiculous. You can just survive with 3 damage sets on. Now, to preface that, you won't face tank a Zerg with 3 damage sets, but you can still run around with like maybe 1 or 2 pieces of heavy armor and survive just fine. Now, to really address an issue like this, we need to take a deep dive into our next topic here. And that topic is class balance. Class balance in ESO is at a place where I personally consider it very meh. Take, for example, your average Mag Sorc or Nightblade player. They're kings of the balance hill right now, and they have been that way for a good while. Alternatively, you have classes such as the Templar and Necromancer, and we all know those have been in the PvP gutter for a good time now. Then in the middle, and this is my personal opinion, you have classes that excel at most of what they want to do, but they don't really feel personally one way or the other. And those classes, in my opinion, are the Dragon Knight, Warden, and Arcanist. Now, I want to add on to this conception of class balance that everybody's going to have a slightly different idea of which class should individually rank on something like a tier list. However, for the sake of generalization, I'm going to say out of that my personal opinion, and that of which I've frequently heard from other players, whether here in the community, on YouTube, either in Discord or in game, is that Sorcerers and Nightblades are the de facto kings of PvP right now. Now, why would that be? Let's take a short look at each of these classes. They both have mobility, whether it's the Sorcerer's access to Streak and Minor Expedition, or the Nightblade's easy access to Shade, Cloak, and Minor and Major Expeditions. They both have absolutely wild damage in this current patch. A good Nightblade or Sorcerer player can hands down just delete people and make it look like child's play. It's ridiculous. Now, they both have ways to mitigate incoming damage really easily. Sorcerers have the absolutely overpowered Hardened Ward right now. Giant Shield gives you a burst heal when you press it. Like, why? And Nightblades can cloak and shade away from burst damage, otherwise relying on things like the Psijic ult to get out of a lot of damage. Then, sustain in either class is a pretty funny joke right now. Just play an Imperial or a Breton, and then, well, your sustain's done. And if you don't have enough sustain with that, you put on your sustain food, maybe even Wretched Vitality or Roxa if you want to be overkill, and just, it's over. You don't need to sustain anymore. Now, as I describe these things to you, I want to ask you one question. Out of all the things I just listed about these two classes, what are the downsides? Go through every class in the game and check off the list. Do they have mobility, strong damage, great damage mitigation, and do they have the ability to sustain? You cannot make that argument for every class in the game, and by all means, you should not be able to make that argument for every class. And that, I want to clarify. The solution to class balance is a little bit, hard to say. To have balanced classes in ESO, we're going to have to touch on a couple topics that are going to come up ahead here. The first of which is that we need to undo the homogenization theory that ZOS has created within the last few years. There's been a term coined by the community as spreadsheet balancing, which has come to be the definition of how ZeniMax has decided to balance PvP and PvP in the Elder Scrolls Online. Every single number of each stat in the game is placed on this theoretical spreadsheet. Each new addition is balanced around, is it the same as other numbers in the spreadsheet? And is this equal to other skills, sets, or whatever numerically? The idea behind this is that it would allow everyone to play what they wanted to play with very minimal difference in performance. In theory, this sounds like a great idea. You can play whatever you want, right? Unfortunately, what this had done in retrospect is neuter class identity and exacerbated the existing differences between underperforming classes compared to the strongest classes. Now, just a moment ago, I mentioned class identity. Some of you out there are going to be looking at me funny when I say class identity. Now, believe this. There was a time where you could build a character specifically because of their traits, and a time even further back if you wanted to build a character around its racial passives. If you've been here a real long time, you'll remember when a Dark Elf Dragon Knight had extra fire damage. Now, there was a time before this homogenization and the overall hybridization of classes where you had separate magicka and stamina specs to every class in the game, and each spec would have its independent weaknesses. For example, you'd have a really tanky Nord Stamina Dragon Knight, or a really fast, hard-hitting, but weak Resistance Orc Stamsorc. Then the opposite of that, you'd have a really pokey, elusive Magicka Nightblade, or a really stand-and-fight Magicka Templar. So, what happened to these things, and how do we fix that? Well, they've been hybridized and homogenized and shifted away from their original niche. How do we find a way to reintroduce them without being the king of all one thing? Well, every class needs a weakness. They should not have everything. There should always be a trade-off for some sort of playstyle. Now, I'm going to go back and use a really old example. The Dragon Knight used to be king of kings of tanky builds. There was a day where the Dragon Knight's wings could do a full damage reflect. You could kill ranged players like Magsorks or Bow Gankers by reflecting all of their damage right back into them. However, no Dragon Knight build in existence in that time frame could run away from you. They did not have access to minor or major expedition as easily as they do now. They were slow. They were very tanky. They had decent to strong damage. And they could sustain via their class passives and such small choices as enchantments and mundus. That was a more balanced time. But we have moved away from that for some reason. That's what the developers have chosen to do. I don't personally agree with that. Now, we also have to talk about some features that were added to the Elder Scrolls Online over its lifetime that have made build diversity worse and altered how you make a build in general. I'd like to point out the worst offender of all these features in my opinion. The addition of a free 1000 weapon and spell damage as a baseline should have never happened, and it heavily contributes to the high HP tankier meta that we've seen. You no longer have to build as much into damage because the game just gives you a free 1000 weapon and spell damage. Why? We don't need that anymore. Damage is already through the roof. So people build tankier just because they don't have to put anything in that damage. It's just there. Now, how do we solve that? This one, probably the easiest. Remove that baseline weapon and spell damage again to force people to build into that damage. Then they have to sacrifice their higher health pools or some sustain to do that more damage. This opens up the possibility of having more weaknesses in classes than there already are. For those of you who go, wait a minute, wouldn't this affect my healing too? That's an excellent point. That could be tied back into maximum resources, equating to higher healing. We don't always need to have a giant health pool and, massive resistances actually build into damage. And it sounds crazy that I'm asking for classes to be weaker, but when you talk about PvP and you see everyone running around with 35, 40k health, and it's just boring. Who cares? Just walk away. Well, folks, I've done a lot of yapping here, so I want to kind of tie this all together. These were my fundamental issues with PvP and ESO. Let me know down in the comments if you agree with me, if you disagree with me, your solutions to some of these problems I presented, or what you'd like me to talk about in a future video. As always, leave a like, drop a comment, and of course, subscribe. I'll see you next video.